we go.
I'm a spark, I'm a fire, get the start on desire.
Oh, there you go, there you go, there you go, there you
How
go.
it feels to be free. Hold my breath, walk a flame. Now I won't be the same.
Just like that, hunting for walleye. Oh, wow, dude. Yeah.
Good way to start the morning.
Beautiful hit.
It's my life. It's my life. And I'm living like the whole wide world is an open road to drive. It's my life. It's my life.
There we go.
I'm in love. I'm a dream.
Oh, look at that fish.
In between.
Oh, there he is. Nice jig in the middle, walleye right below the pontoon. There we go.
Like a rolling stone that has
Oh, it's the size of this beast. Unbelievable.
It's my life. And I'm living like the whole wide world is an open road to drive. It's my life.
Bam, that didn't even hit bottom. There we go. Doubled up. Nice. That's a good one.
Whole wide world is an open road to drive.
This segment is brought to you by MD Marine Insurance. Boat insurance made easy.
Guys, I just love these commercials, and you know, I don't know if they've just been around a long time. I haven't been paying attention to them, but the Lund commercial is just all kinds of energy. Like all the commercials we've been watching that we've had in between, a lot of them are all new product. Like it's pretty awesome to see that stuff. And obviously, this segment will be brought to you by MD Marine Insurance, friends of ours. And if you are looking for marine insurance, make sure you give them a shout and give them an opportunity to give you a quote. Report whatever part of Canada you're in, I'm sure they'll be able to cover you. We had a great first episode. Peter Levesque actually came in from Muskie's Canada. We talked about Muskie Odyssey and how that'll be that's just in a couple of weeks. You go on their site. We'll be promoting it on our site as well too. It's a great event for Muskie guys. And you don't have to be a Muskie Canada member to go there or attend it. And this year, obviously, it's virtual, so everybody will be able to attend it. And Gord Pizer had mentioned how he's excited about being there, and obviously Josh will be coming up shortly. He'll be there as well too. So, one thing I found, it doesn't matter how many of these times you see these guys, whether it's through a club event or whatever, they always have new information to share, and it's awesome. And it seems like you can never get enough information. So we're gonna just go to commercial break, and then we're gonna come back, and we have Jeremy Smith. Obviously, we all know Jeremy's a great angler, great person, and I just find with Jeremy, he's like they all are, but just with Jeremy, I really relate to this guy, so it's pretty cool. At all levels, whether, let's say we talked about pike, and we talked yesterday morning about walleye. That was new segments to our show, which we'll be bringing next year as well back again. And all those past segments, whether it's ice fishing or it's any one of those things, or just shoreline fishing, we had all these great seminars that have been going on, and still many more to come moving forward. But you can always go back into and watch them over and over again. And even if with Jim and Gord, they were very specific, so you can actually go in and you can stop and play them, and you just really get into what you need. So just keep in mind that even though we're not, it's not live, like we are live here, but the show is not happening. All the tackle stores are trying to support us. So the thing is, there's lots of deals happening out there, and great discounts. And you can go through our website and go to the tackle stores, whether it's Natural Sports, and also it's got a great online store, Pro J's, JB's Fishing Depot. They're all there, and also Pro Castle as well. They're all Pro Tackle and Peterborough Tackle as well too. So there's a lot of tackle stores that we are supporting this show, and they'll be back again next year in live, so you can buy. But right now, if it's not online, it's curbside or delivery. They'll get you whatever you need, and take advantage of the preseason thing. Like Bob Dizumi said, like, don't wait till the stuff gets off the shelves. Get in front of it. Get the stuff you need. Listen to the seminars. These guys are telling you the new product that's going to be available to you. Take advantage of that time. One more thing I do want to bring to your attention is boats, right? Because it is the spring fishing and boat show. And if you are still thinking of buying a new boat, you know what? You need to contact the dealers ASAP, because there is still opportunity. Even though the manufacturers are sold out, a lot of these dealers still have opportunity to change colors and change options on these boats that they've already pre-ordered, that they know a lot of these boats stuff you might want, right? So along with that, there's also a lot of spring catch stuff that you can do. So up to the end of February, usually you'll get a lot of gift package, or you get something to boats. You're eligible for all that stuff, not to mention extended warranties with some of these outboard marine manufacturers. So you want to take advantage of that whole boat scene before the end of the month. Reach out to the dealers. We have a whole list of dealers here with us, and a whole slew of brands of names of fishing boats, along with a boat registry that we have in here as well too. So you can go in there and see some different boats that are available. So once again, guys, we're going to tune out. We're going to be right back. We'll be back with you with Jeremy and Josh in just a few minutes.
There are people who know that there's more to getting there than just getting there, who know that going fast isn't fast enough, and who know living isn't the same as feeling alive. They're people who aren't afraid to stand out, make noise, make waves, and never look back. This one's for them. The Mercury 115 horsepower and 150 horsepower Pro XS outboards. Built to win tournaments. Designed to win your heart. Mercury, go boldly.
Hi Daiwa fans, Mark Mills here, Field Marketing Manager for Daiwa. I'm going to show you all the new 20 and 21 products. Designed strictly for slow pitch digging. We're very innovative with this. You've seen it in Saltiga. T-Wing system. TWS stands for T-Wing system. So this has the T-Wing system that you see on all the tool. And MQ is our actually monocoque body. One-piece frame by Daiwa. Hi Daiwa fans, my name is Mark Mills. I'm the Marketing Field Manager for Daiwa, and I want to talk about a brand new product. And that brand new product that I'm going to talk to you guys about is the new ProRex 400 by Daiwa. This ProRex reel with the T-Wing system is designed for one thing: muskie fishing. It is designed for the muskie anglers. We're talking internally designed for muskie anglers and externally designed for muskie anglers. And it matches absolutely perfect with the Daiwa ProRex rods. But let's go through some of the features and technologies that this reel has. So we'll talk about the outside of the reel. You're going to see it's very ergonomically correct. You've got your MagForce braking system here on the outside of the reel, allowing you to adjust for your castability so you don't backlash. Over and above that, you have an easy access cast control system here. You also have a click drag system, and you have an adjustable handle that goes from 70 millimeters to 80 millimeters, depending what you're fishing for and the technique you have. You've got an EVA handle, and all in all wrapped into an aluminum frame and aluminum side plate. Let's dig into actually the internal portions of this reel and the internal technology. This reel actually comes in 3 different gear ratios: a 5-to-1, a 7-to-1, and an 8-to-1, all based off of a hardened brass gearing system, allowing you for more drag pressure, better torque, and better gear durability when pulling big baits for muskie and catching big muskies. Over and above that, internally, we went to a much stiffer clutch system. As you can hear, it's got a very strong clutch system. What that does is that gives you the reassurance day in and day out that you can make those casts and not snap off lures, and just actually have a much stronger reel for throwing those big baits. So this is the new ProRex 400 TW by Daiwa, designed for muskie anglers and the muskie fishery.
And we are back. And where's my guys, Victoria? Let's bring up Jeremy Smith and Josh. There you go. Hey guys, how are you? Welcome back. We had an opportunity to talk a bit in the behind the rooms before this all happened. Josh, you're new to the scene here. Just give you an opportunity to maybe introduce yourself and a little bit of a background on yourself.
Sure. My name is Josh Borowski. I've been guiding muskies full time for about 20 years.
Wow.
And while I do guide in Minnesota, I spend the majority of my time guiding on a Canadian Shield Lake, Lake Vermilion. So I think a lot of hopefully my skills and experience will transfer to any Canadian related questions. And also I used to travel all over Canada, fishing on major league trips all the time for long periods of time. Just don't get to do it as much because I'm guiding all the time. Also tournament fisherman, fish on the pro circuit, filmed a lot of stuff with the Linders. That's about it.
Is that how you guys tie together, Jeremy?
I've known Josh for a long time, and he's just been one of those guys that's consistently put muskies in the boat for years and years, and just one of those super hardcore guys that has a really unique way of thinking and putting systems together and plans, processes that really put a lot of big fish in the boat consistently. So Josh is one of those guys you guys will really appreciate, because every time I talk to Josh, I learn a ton. Just as when we were talking about this yesterday, Andy, coming to this show, the caliber of anglers that we run into up here is amazing. So it's a learning experience for me, and it will be for Josh, and I hope you guys learn as well. So it should be a really great group of guys that we all get to we'll get to answer some of your questions. And Josh is one of those guys that will be able to dive into some pretty serious details on muskies.
Well, I think if you're part of the Linder team, you have to be in that mindset, because we all know you are. So and Jeremy, and James is like, it's just I think it's a you have to have as part of your preparation. It's part of your oh my God, it has to be you in order to, I can't think of the name. I'm like totally. Anyways, guys, listen to me. I'm not going to keep you guys too long in here. I want you guys to start the presentation. I want the guys that are tuning in, I'm watching the number counts come up on the screen. Start adding your questions in as you go, because they might touch on them, but after we go to a quick commercial break later on the show, they're going to be answering all those questions for you. And there's going to be a lot of information, and you might forget after the fact to ask those questions. So keep in mind, those questions are, and how these guys answer them are beneficial to other people listening, because there's a lot of people that sometimes don't think of those questions till after. So if you come across a thought thinking, hey, you know what, I had this question and I forgot to ask it. It's better for you to ask it right away, and it'll just load up on the screen, and they'll read through them later on. So guys, just a real quick note, as I said earlier, keep Muskie Canada in mind. Remember, they have the Muskie Odysseys coming up in just a few weeks, and that'll be a great event, as it's always been, even though it'll be virtual. And right now, I'm going to get out of here, so I know you guys got a lot to talk about. So let's talk Muskie, and thank you very much, Jeremy and Josh, and away you go. Take it from here.
All right, thanks, Andy. Yeah, this should be really fun. So I think the best way to kick this event off will be to dive into Josh's muskie brain here a little bit, and how remarkable he is at consistently catching muskies. So obviously, a lot of us out there know how challenging it can be to get a fish in the boat. They're muskies, right? They're not bass. They don't jump in the boat all the time. And so, to me, you run into guys that will have these stretches where, over a week period, we had 2 days where we did really good, but man, we had 4 of those days were horrible, and one was okay. So when you get to talk to somebody who can make that week-long muskie trip that you've got consistent day after day after day, understanding the environment, putting the pieces of the puzzle together, knowing when to do what and make those decisions is really big. So Josh, I'm hoping you can just kind of dive into some of your thought process on how you're so consistent.
Sure. So I will start by saying what I'm about to tell you is, and that is kind of my niche, is I do feel like I focus on being consistent. Keep in mind that what I'm about to tell you isn't necessarily how to always catch the biggest muskie or the most muskies. It's how to make sure you catch muskies every day. But I will say, if you follow the process, or at least some of what I'm about to share with you, you also a lot of times get to be the boat that catches the most and the biggest too. So little things matter, I think, more than we realize. And I was doing a podcast earlier this week, and I got asked a question about like baits that I use, and are there any baits in your career that have changed the way you fish? And I'm not going to dive too much into that side of it, but what it made me realize when I got asked the question is it made me reflect on the processes that I use to achieve that consistency. And I didn't really realize how important it was until once in a blue moon, I get to fish with friends. I'm usually always guiding, right? And something different happens when I start fishing with friends and when I'm guiding. When I'm guiding, I generally have control of the ship. Like everyone kind of, they're there to fish with me, and I say, okay, this is what we're going to do. This is the game plan. And everyone just kind of goes along with it, right? But when you fish with buddies, especially my buddies, because we're all experienced, right? Everyone just kind of does their own thing. And that's when some of these components of this process that I'm about to share with you start to like unravel, or we're not doing them. And it bothers me like a lot, because in my head, I'm like, this is costing us fish right now. And so usually we can't fish very long without me having a heart to heart with the guys. And I'll say, look, guys, like we got the right 3 baits on. These are all good selections, but we're not fishing them in the right order. And just that alone can impact your catch rate, right? And to explain that a little bit, I'll dive into 2 things, and then I'll kind of jump over to you, Jeremy. But I guess one would just be hooking percentages. That every category of bait, from bucktails down to gliders and walk the dog topwaters, they all have differing hooking percentages, right? Meaning if you get 7 bites on a bucktail versus 7 bites on like a glider or walk the dog topwater, you're gonna, all things being equal, you get the same number of bites. You're gonna convert many more of those bites into catches with a bucktail versus like the lower hooking percentage bait, right? And all the other baits are somewhere kind of in between there. So ideally, you want to use the best hooking percentage bait that you can get away with, right? Because that's just how you're going to convert the most bites into catches. But the part that we don't know every day when we go out there is, what can we get away with, right? And so how do you figure that out? And so one of the things that's important to me is just the order that we present the baits to the fish in. And so if I have a couple guests with me fishing, plus me, I'm usually in the back of the boat, I always like to present the baits from the highest hooking percentage bait is always the first one in the boat. So what that bait is kind of depends on the time of year and where we're fishing. So you can plug in different baits into this process, but for me, that process always remains the same from opening day till ice. Whatever the best hooking percentage bait in the boat is, that one's going to be shown first to the fish. And then, the next best is going to be the middle. And then I'm, by default in the back of the boat, usually going to be throwing the poorest hooking percentage bait. Along with that, though, there's one other caveat or thing that goes with it is how fast can you get away with, right? Because all these baits can be fished at, different speeds. Bucktails, you can go laser warp speed, and in some baits like a tube, a jig, or a glide bait are fished at much slower speeds, right? And so, but again, like if you can choose which one of those you can get away with, which would be better, right? And maybe like a more controlled experiment to explain my philosophy on that is just trolling too, right? If you took 2 boats that were trolling, one boat's going 4 miles an hour, one boat's going 2 miles an hour. If the fish didn't care about how fast you were going and they actually would eat both trolled baits 4 miles an hour and 2 miles an hour equally good, and you got the same number of bites, which way would you catch more fish? I'm calling if you go 4, you're going to catch twice as many just because you're covering twice as much ground, right? But with that being said, some days the fish aren't eating baits that are, being trolled that fast, and you have to go slow. So along with how good of a hooking percentage bait can we get away with, I'm always trying to get the question answered of how fast can we get away with today, right? Because the faster we can get away with, again, the more bites we're going to get that convert into catches. And so along with the hooking percentage baits being fished in a certain order, I also like the speeds to be fished in a certain order. So I always like the fastest which is nice because like a lot of times it's a bucktail, especially in the summer months, right? Because you can fish them very fast, but they're also very high hooking percentage baits. So they fit both of those bills. So I like that in the front of the boat. You know, the midsection one, again, depending on the time of year, could be a variety of baits. It could be rubber, it could be a top water, whatever. And then a lot of times in the back, I'm always going to be throwing the slowest, you know, poorest, most erratic bait in the lineup. And at least that's how we always come out of the chute every day in my boat, because that process has just served me well in actually figuring it out. And so, and you know, this extends, and I'm sure it'll come into some of our other questions today, but in my mind, when I'm fishing out there, I'm always kind of trying to do controlled experiments, trying to control it as much as we can and present things in a certain way. And it even goes further into like how you choose the colors, how you choose the spots you fish, the types of structure, the depth that you fish at. But I try to have a very controlled, you know, experiment in the beginning. And then as you start making contacts with fish, I'll start to, then we can cheat. If you get bit on the bucktail right away, right? Then that tells you, okay, guys, looks like we can get away with fast. And so the baits start to shift that way. And then maybe we start, you know, we start using 2 bucktails in the front of the boat. We start playing with trying to dial in the color, you know, and then my really slow erratic bait comes off. And maybe I start throwing from the back the bait that was started in the middle. Right. And then as the day progresses, if it keeps, you know, shifting that way, that you can get away with fast, you keep pushing it and pushing it. And to give you an example of how fast it can get, sometimes in my boat, and a lot of times these are the really fun days, is we'll get to the point where if it is burning bucktails, and especially if it ends up being on rocks on my home water on Lake Vermilion, we will get to the point where I just call it, you know, tournament casting or deck casting, where I complete fishing or quit fishing completely. And I just run the big motor and I'll fly up to, because there's some spots. I know Pizer, I listened to just a little bit of that previous seminar, and he was talking about how, you know, there's certain spots, right, where you figure out like, this is the cast, man. Like, especially it seems to be more that way on rocks than weeds. And the nice thing about it is once you find it, like rocks don't really change from year to year. I mean, the water levels do a little bit, but a lot of times those fish, like once you find that sweet spot, you got it like forever, right? And on Vermilion, there are definitely spots like that where it's like this cast, basically like a 1 cast or 3 casts on the spot. And then some of them are bigger areas where like, you know, you should go all the way around this thing. But when we really get on them and we can get away with fast, I'll take it to the point where I'm actually, you know, rifling across the lake wide open. I'll throw the big motor into neutral. I won't even put the trolling motor down. I'll literally like creep up to that waypoint, throw it in neutral and be like, 2 casts, like right there, you guys, and they'll make them. And that fish either bites or it doesn't. And we're ripping to the next spot. You know, and especially when we have a feeding window, I'll like go to that. And then if we, you know, rifle through, you know, maybe a dozen, 15, 16 spots and we don't get bit and nothing's chasing, then we might settle back in again and start working with the trolling motor. And then again, you know, and then the longer it kind of goes and the tougher it gets, we might kind of staggering our baits back out into that process again. Like, did things change? Did the conditions change? Did the attitudes of the fish change? But that's I guess a fair amount about my process and how I think. And one question also that I know we're probably going to get asked today at some point is, what is your favorite bait? And my answer to that is I don't have one. Okay. What's more important to me is that process that I just shared with you and kind of how you plug in these baits in a certain order when you fish them. And I always say, like, when I get asked that question, that's like asking a construction worker, if you could only build a house with one tool, what would it be? Right. You can't do it. You kind of need them all. And I'm going to shift over to Jeremy here, because I know Jeremy, along with, you know, when it comes to lures, choosing the right tool for the job, I know you're really passionate about also, you know, rod, reel, line, and choosing kind of the right. Why don't you tell us a little bit about your philosophies and beliefs on like equipment and using the right tool for the job?
Yeah, I'll dive into that, and I just want to echo a little bit more about what Josh was saying here too. That was great information, and really, you know, what he's talking about is being efficient. Efficiency is the name of the game, whether it's musky fishing or for anything. And that system provides a ton of efficiency where you're not going through this whole guesswork of what should we throw here, what should be there. So having a plan before you go into it, knowing what you should be doing, and then adjusting to it obviously makes you more efficient. Of course, muskie fishing, Josh, we were talking about this earlier. If you just looked at the numbers of what you get in return for every cast, it's almost statistically zero. So it's you just aren't catching that many fish per cast. So little tiny things, these very, very tiny percentages in muskie fishing end up ballooning into your biggest fish, the most fish you've ever caught. It's those tiny, tiny little deals that make or break a season. Of course, one cast you go from zero to a hero, but that what Josh is talking about really hits home here. And when we're talking about efficiency, I've talked about this when I've been up there before too, is that one of the things that I've always been a proponent of in muskie fishing is trying to specialize your gear. Now, I know that the stuff is expensive. If you're just getting into it, you've got one stick. I understand that. But as you get into muskie fishing more and more and more, you don't want your rod to be all 9.5 foot extra heavy rods with 100-pound braid and really heavy fluorocarbon leaders. And that's what you're going to throw small number 6s or number 8 bucktails with and throw top raiders with, and you're going to troll with it. That doesn't work. So if you looked at, I'm a multi-species guy, but if I was going to go out bass fishing, largemouth bass, for example, for the day, I'll probably have anywhere from, say, on the light end, maybe 8 or 10 rods rigged up to maybe as many as 15, 16, 17 rods rigged up with different line, different lures, different powers, different actions, different gearing on the reels that I'm using. So I've got the right tool for the job, what I'm doing. And in the end of the day, that might seem like, boy, that's crazy. But it not only makes the experience more enjoyable, it presents the lures better, and ultimately you're more efficient because of it. So, with the muskie side of things, the biggest thing that I see is guys getting into it. They're going to go buy a rod and a reel that's designed to go throw pounders or big giant muskie baits. And I'm not saying those things catch a ton of fish, but that's a relatively specialized piece of equipment. Now, if you're just getting into it, it's not fun to go throw giant baits, go throw supermodels and pounders all day. It's a lot of work. It's taxing. If your body's not used to it, you can fatigue quickly. So I recommend starting with something that's a little lighter. It's a little more comfortable. It's going to provide you more endurance. You're going to be able to put more hours in, because really at the end of the day, it's about being there, casting, being on your game when those windows open up and those opportunities present themselves. So if you wear yourself out early, you're going to miss some opportunities throughout the day. So we've got some rods with St. Croix that we designed that were the downsizer series. And I a lot of people that I take muskie fishing for the first time, they just love them. It's got a 300 size reel. I'll put 65-pound braid on it, a little light wire leader. It's a 9-foot rod. It feels like a little bit bigger than a flipping stick. And guys that haven't muskie fished can go fishing for the entire day. They can go dawn to dusk, where if I gave them one of my bigger outfits and had them throwing, double tens and stuff all day, I noticed after 2 hours, they're just sitting down and it's boring and it's not fun and it's work, and fishing's supposed to be fun, right? So when you can make those little adjustments to equipment to make the experience more enjoyable, I strongly recommend doing that. So look at some of the lighter stuff. Now, Josh catches way more big muskies than I do. A lot of people do, but I like when the equipment feels right for the presentation. So don't just think that muskie fishing, because that's what it used to be, is one rod. I can do all this stuff with all of these baits. It's just like bass fishing. There's rods, reels, line, leaders designed to present baits at specific times. That makes sense, Josh.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. And just you got me thinking about a couple of things. Is one, right when you jumped in talking, you were just talking about the little things. And it just made me reflect on that. That is like such a big part of like muskie fishing and your success rate. Is sometimes when I'll do seminars, I'll actually say I think we, like, as guides or really experienced fishermen, you have like, okay, this little thing might only help you catch 3 more muskies every year, right? And this little thing might only help you catch 2 more muskies every year. And this little thing might only help you catch 5. But if you have 100 of those little things, that you do, right? You start tallying up how many fish that adds up into a season. It's a very significant number. And so a lot of times it is the little things. And also you just got me thinking about equipment when you were talking too. And so I wanted to kind of share a couple things too that might be a little bit seem oddball, but they make sense to me, like as far as the right equipment for the right job. I definitely, for the majority of my presentations, do like a very high speed reel. But and I know most of the reels now that you get these days are just that way by default, right? Because that's what the majority of us like. But if you have some older reels, and there's still some on the market too that are slower, the one presentation I actually think a slow reel is really nice for is for jerk baits, especially like gliders. And it's because what it does is, you know, because your retrieve rate is much slower, the key to a glide bait, and I should share this, by the way, just because guiding, I see a lot of people, right, work like walk the dog topwaters and glide baits. And, you know, there's a fair amount of people where, let's see if I can get my hand in the screen here. This is kind of weird, but it does more like just like a 45-degree angle. There's my hand. That's hard to do. It's like reverse, like looking in a mirror. But, you know, a lot of guys will, you know, have the 45-degree. They won't really get that bait just like walking really good side to side. And it's because you're not feeding that bait enough slack between your jerks. And a lot of times these faster reels, that's what happens is, even though you're trying to slow down your retrieve rate, it's weird because it's almost like an eighth of a revolution like between your jerks to you don't want to bring in too much line or that bait won't walk the right way. And so using a much slower reel will help with that. That's also the reason why, in case this is you, because I know this is a lot of people, when you work those baits, there's a learning process where sometimes people like they can't get it, and then, or maybe the best they ever get it is doing the 45-degree angles. But and then the next step that you get good at is like, hey, look, I'm doing it. It's walking really good out there. But then when you get about halfway back to the boat, or you get close to the boat, you kind of lose it and it starts not walking as well. The reason that that's happening is because when your spool empties out on a long cast, okay, your reel is slower out there because the line is off your reel. And as your spool starts to fill up with the line, your line actually gets faster through the course of your retrieve. So as it gets closer to the boat, even though you're reeling in the same cadence, you're bringing in more line per turn of the handle. And so now you're bringing in more slack than you were at the beginning. And that's what's causing your bait not to walk side to side. And so the way that you have to fix that is you basically have to feed more slack to the bait between your jerks as the bait gets closer to the boat. And also just going to piggyback one other thing on that. It's also something to think about, even with like high speed presentations, right, is the pound test and the diameter of the line that you use, especially if you're going to do some of the downsizing stuff that Jeremy's talking about, and you're going to use like a smaller reel. Well, those reels have lower line capacity on them. And sometimes if you put a little bit lighter line on them too, what happens is, your spool basically in a long cast isn't going to empty out as far as it would, with a thicker line, right? So your reel stays faster throughout your entire retrieve. I feel like generally it's a little bit easier to cast too when your spool is full like that as far as getting distance. So you can go ahead, Jeremy.
No, that all that stuff is great information. So we get a lot of questions about gearing and what we're talking, how fast your reel is. So whether you're getting a 5, a 6, a 7, or even an 8 gear, those things, of course, all come into play for specific applications. Now, if you're going to start, you're looking at something right in the middle. A 6 gear is kind of a nice deal where you can pull some heavier blades. It's got a little more pulling power. A lower geared reel obviously has more torque. It's going to be easier for you. But as you advance, like Josh made a great point about a slower reel on that slack line presentation. Now, once you get good at walking the dog, a faster reel is going to be a better tool for you when you understand line management and how to feed the bait and how to make it dance. So once you're proficient at that, it's nice to just go like Josh was talking about. If you want to walk the dog, you're not going boom to pick up the slack. It's like boom, doom, doom. It takes you're hardly ever having to move that reel around because it's getting tight. But you need to understand how much you're feeding it. Once you understand that, that's great. But at the same time, if you're going to say, okay, I want to get an 8 gear for something like that, you start using an 8 gear to burn blades all day, it's going to wear you out. It's fatiguing, it's tiring. But if you're conditioned to doing those things, I like the faster reels because I feel that I can make lures do more things. So if speed is indeed a deal, and I find that I've got a 5 gear on the end of my line and I want to burn little blades, I'm reeling as fast as I can. And I see a fish is getting hot, I want to speed it up. I'm doing this. The bait is still not accelerating. Where with an 8 gear, I'm kind of going like this, or a 7 gear the whole time, and the bait's moving as fast or faster than a 5 gear where I'm cranking faster, but I can put speed on the bait. If I need to put speed on the bait, boom. And the other thing is, if a fish bites you and it jumps and it's coming forward and it's just doing the wild stuff, with the faster gear, it's just like boom, boom, boom. I can keep the rod loaded. You want to make sure you've got good load in the rod throughout the process. So it's what Josh is talking about makes perfect sense if you're getting into it. Having something that's a little bit slower, it's less fatiguing. It's going to allow you to work those baits that are more challenging, more efficiently and more effectively. And as you develop into this arsenal of different reels and rods and powers and actions, you start to get into the faster stuff because you're more proficient in a lot of other elements of it.
And one little tip I'll throw in there too with that is if you're trying to decide when you're ready to like cheat on the faster side with those presentations, is towards the end of kind of the perfection scale, I guess, is when if you can walk a glider or walk the dog in place just without reeling in any line, and you can sit there and just make it walk back and forth just by twitching your rod, but you're not reeling at all, then you really got the cadence down really well, and you could become much more versatile with what equipment you choose to use that bait.
Oh, 100%.
But if you're not there yet, then you might not be ready.
Yep. So no, those are all really great things. And one of the things Josh and I were talking about the other day too, and is obviously a hot topic now is electronics and what's happening in that realm right now too. And so some of the technologies that we're using right now with sonar and mapping, etc., are starting to answer questions of like, are the fish here or are they not biting? So Josh and I were talking about sand as an example of a spot that, for years, I mean, even when I was just getting into muskie fishing 20 some years ago, I would hear guys on Leech Lake is where I grew up fishing. I would hear guys talk about, oh, the sand bite is really getting hot. And back then I just couldn't get myself to really dive into, it just seems so weird to fish a nothing break. It's just absolutely nothing. How this just seems like a huge waste of time, right? Maybe there's something here, but I'm going to go fish a rock reef because I know that there's fish there. I'm going to go fish a good weed bed. I want to be more related to structure. The sand thing kind of turns into the open water thing too. But now, like what Josh and I were talking about with side imaging, okay, I want to go fish this sand beach that's a mile long. You put the boat in gear, you go 3, 4, 5 miles an hour till you get your reading right. You start ripping down the beach. You go, oh, there's one. Oh, there's one. There's one. And you're not wasting time fishing a mile-long deal. You can scroll over, put an icon on the fish, and come back and attack it. I mean, that kind of stuff that's happening in terms of technology right now is mind-blowing. So it's this culmination of, the incredible mapping that we've got now, so we can be on the spot, not trying to line things up, knowing specifically where the boat is, how the contour is laid out, having side imaging show us how the structures are laid out, where transitions are, where big boulders are. I fish with the Humminbird 360 in the bow of my boat, so now I can see forward. So if I'm fishing new water, shield water in particular, this is so incredibly valuable when you're bumbling around trying to find new spots. How many times have you just rolled up on top of what was like, oh man, that's where the huge boulder was, and there's 3 pieces of cabbage next to it, and I drove the boat right over it. Now I can see in front of the boat and say, all right, I need to back off. I need to make a hard left turn here, guys. This is our angle. This is where we need to be casting. So your casting angles, you're seeing fish. It really is remarkable. People ask, is this stuff really worth it? And if you're into fishing, man, if you want to just have the learning curve accelerated, this stuff is the deal.
Yeah, Jeremy and I were talking, a couple days ago about this, and that was one of the things we definitely want to touch on. Is I do feel like and I mean, this has happened. It happens again and again, but we're definitely at this a new era where once again electronics are really starting to change. Just not how easy or hard it is to catch fish, but just how we fish in general. And Jeremy gave a great example, the sand thing. And one of the things I just want to add on to that is part of, I think, what he's saying is particularly when the fish are on sand, if you have like mega imaging or mega 360 on your boat, like muskies stand out like sore thumbs. I mean, you can see every fin on the muskie, their tail. There's no question that is a muskie for sure, right? And it's just something new that we didn't have that kind of certainty before. And so, especially because that you can see them that way and that well on sand, and you can still pick them out, but it's definitely more challenging, I think, on rocks if they're hugging tight. And then, if they're outside the weed edge, you can see them really well there too. But sometimes if they're buried in there or behind and you got to shoot through, it gets a little bit, trickier to pick them out there too. But on sand, for sure, like it's just, there's no question about it. And so like one of the ways that's just changed how I fish is like, so if we're in a lull in the middle of the day, or like it's a struggle fest that day, and we're trying to get on fish, like that is like one of the things that I will lean on very quickly in the day is just going and running long pieces of sand like that. Because, if you run a long piece of sand and you don't see one, I feel like there's no fish there. Like I'm confident, like, because I really believe that if they're there, I will see them absolutely, like without question, right? And so even if I don't see anything, I've accomplished something. Like I can rule that out. Like we're not going back there the rest of the day, right? And usually, eventually, you do it, and a lot of days it doesn't take very long, but you start seeing them. Well, there's one, and then nowadays you can. And this is kind of, I think, what's changing is instead of fishing structures, we're really starting to just fish specific fish for themselves, like seeing them, right? And so you can see that fish on the sand, scroll your cursor over, right on the fish, zap it with your waypoint and start doing a donut around it, casting at it, seeing if you can move it or get it to bite. And even if it doesn't, now you at least have a fish to work with where you can go back later in the day and check on that fish, right? And see if it's still there, and in a more active mode, you're halfway there. You found one, because you can't catch a muskie where there's not one, right? So it's a pretty big piece of the puzzle that's already that's already accomplished. And another thing I would add that's definitely sped things up a lot for me, I guess, is we have a good suspended bite that happens on the majority of the lakes in Minnesota. And I know the same bite happens in Canada as well. Early, like, as soon as the fish come out of the spawning bays in my neck of the woods, it's usually like mid-June to early July, depending on how, cold or warm of a spring that you have. But anyway, something I've learned over time with that bite, and by the way, if you're someone that fishes where there's not Cisco's, because I also guide on the metro lakes at times a year, the same bite happens there. The muskies still kind of do the same thing. It's kind of strange that they do, because you would think there would just be less open water forage out there for them. But on a lot of the lakes I fish in the metro area, the same thing happens, is there's a suspended bite that happens there. But what I'm getting at, what I wanted to share is that over the years and on a lot of different bodies of water, from Canada to Lake Vermilion to Metro Lakes to Eagle River, Wisconsin, it seems to be pretty universal. Hard to soft bottom transitions seem to be like a really key thing. It's an edge that those muskies are using out there, and we can debate about like why that is. I think, and I have a theory about it, by the way, but I'm also willing to admit that it's just a theory, right? And it could be wrong. What's not debatable is that these fish are there, right? Like we can argue about why they're there, but I can tell you it's a thing that they're there. And for me, it started just 20 plus years ago, stumbling across open water fish by accident. It was a sandwich break, basically, right? So, hey, I need a sandwich. Let's put our rods in the holder and we'll just go across the middle of the lake over to that spot and have a sandwich. And, you start catching fish while you're doing that. And you're like, oh, this is the thing. We can do this. We can catch fish like this. And then, so, you start doing it. And over the years, you catch lots of fish. And every time I'd catch a fish out there, I'd always throw a waypoint down, where we caught it. And eventually, instead of just trolling around aimlessly, my trolling run became kind of zigzagging over all these waypoints out there in the middle of the lake, right? And one day while I was doing that, I should have figured it out sooner, right? But I just had this revelation, like, wow, like so many of these waypoints that we're going over, they're like right on like a hard, like it switches from a hard bottom to a mud bottom. Like you can see it plain as day on your graph, right? And so once I kind of noticed that correlation, obviously started mapping out, right? More, which is because a lot of times it's a line that goes for miles, like all the way around the basin, right? And once you find it, it can be quite a gravy train of muskies and bait. And so anyway, and by the way, part of my theory on that is I do think around that time of year that we have these bites, there's a lot of bug and insect, mayfly hatches and stuff that happen. And I think that, and this is where it's theory, might not be true, but I do think that, a lot of times that those edges may create edges of bugs and insect larvae, that are hatching. And so, and then therefore maybe in turn create an edge of bait fish. And then therefore in turn, the muskies are also relating to that edge, because it's a weird deal. Like we might be in 45 feet of water, like it's very deep water, and the muskies are like way up high in the water column. They might only be like, 1 foot down or 10 foot down. And a lot of times they're 15 feet or higher. So that edge is way down there below them. But when you look at where you run into them, like they're still relating to that edge somehow. And so I'm not sure if that's why it is, but I'll circle all the way back now. Where I was trying to go with this is one of the ways that electronics has kind of changed my ability to like fish those edges is in the past. So if I went to a new lake where I wanted to fish that bite, that was like kind of one of the first things I would do is, you're trolling around, you're looking for bait, you're looking for muskies on your electronics. But I'd also, anytime I would see that change, in bottom composition, I would just like throw an icon down on that thing. I have a certain icon that I use for a hard to soft bottom transition. And then once you find it just once, right, you can start to troll a circle around it, right? And if you go, there'll be another one, right? Because it's usually, sometimes there's like a little rock formation or like a reef that's really deep out there. But a lot of times it's an edge that can go for miles. And so you got to find it once. And then once you find it, you can do a circle around it and you'll hit it again, throw a waypoint down. You can do a bigger circle and you can kind of keep, figuring out the direction that it lies and then jog back and forth across it. And like I said, it just seems to be a really big magnet for those fish. But what I just told you, that takes a lot of time, right, to do that. And now what you can do is like with hummingbirds, they have the auto chart live feature where if you go into your settings, you can actually create a bottom composition map of the lake that actually just records for you and color codes the map, right? So it'll make the hard bottom one color and the soft bottom, a different color, and then everything in between is a different shading color. And so you have this amazing color coded map. And you can record going like fairly at a pretty good speed. You can be on plane and going slow. Not like wide open, but you can build this map and you can actually watch it auto populate. So what I've just done, over the last like 4 or 5 years on Vermilion is just whenever I'm driving around, I'm painting the picture. I just kind of, just go one lane over and I can watch my screen fill in. So I've built like, in a lot of the basins, I have the whole entire basin covered, like painted in, and I can see where all those hard to soft bottom transitions are. And it's crazy when you take like my fish waypoints of muskies where I've marked them and caught them out there in the open water, and you lay those over these color coded maps, and it's just like a, dot to dot drawing basically all the way around, the perimeter of some of these edges. So sorry, that was kind of a long-winded thing, Jeremy, but it's something I think it's important. And we're sharing with everybody.
Well, yeah, I agree. I mean, what you just said echoes exactly what my experience has been fishing that open water stuff too. And I am just floored. It seems so bizarre that these transitions could happen in 30 to 40 feet. They might happen in 70 or 90 feet of water in some cases where I've seen it happen. And like that is where the fish are. I have no idea how fish can be 60 feet away from it vertically and still know it's there. And it's not only muskies, walleyes do the exact same thing. Predators are on those edges. I mean, Dick Pearson talked about this years and years ago about muskies being a fish of edges. They just love edges. And we're learning more and more and more that edges aren't just a weed edge. It's not just a the edge of a rock pile. These edges are the surface, they're the bottom, they're transitions from sand to mud or gravel to mud or whatever that is. And what is also really important, I think what Josh said, and I kind of want to echo what we do. So a lot of our job, unfortunately this year didn't involve a lot of Canadian fishing, but is we work with Canadian tourism. So you're going to this lake, you're going to this lake, we're going to places that we've never been before. And we've got to make television content while we're there. And we never hit the water and be like, okay, yeah, we're here. I mean, we do as much research as we can, but we don't just go fish the first good looking spot out in front of the lodge. That never happens. I'll burn, if I'm there for a week, like a lot of times I will end up putting on a 5-day window, I might put 25 hours on my motor in those 25 days. And it's just basically trolling. I'm looking with my eyes. I'm looking with my electronics. I'll drive everything that looks good. The first time I go to it, I'm going to just totally blow over it. I'm going to drive my big motor over it. I'm going to lay down waypoints on spots that look good, where I think the key location is going to be. And I'm going to tear that thing apart, because you're just like I was talking about before, using 360 to look ahead. That's a big advantage for sure. But if you just go out and start casting, so often you're just missing pieces of the puzzle. And the other thing that we've really found is that, of course, you're just doing detective work, right? Like you might go fish the most incredible rock point that's got a saddle between two islands. It's got weeds in front of it, deep water. It's like, oh man, if you drew a muskie spot, there should be one here. Well, it probably is a great muskie spot, but for whatever reason, that might be in a 100-foot basin. And if you're there in July, most of the muskies might actually be in like a 40 to 60-foot basin. So I see this on a lot of shield lakes where there will be particular basins where the life is at. Early in the spring, it's often way back and shallow stuff. We'll use like Eagle Lake would be a great example of this, where it's an 80-mile long lake where the western half of the lake is deep, clear lake trout water. And the southeast portion is the deep basin is 12 feet, and it's a huge area. If you're in that southeast portion of Eagle Lake in June, it is world-class walleye, muskie, pike, smallmouth fishing. It's absolutely phenomenal. But if you go there in August, it's not very good fishing, right? These fish move through these open systems. And so we'll drive these spots. We'll look with our electronics. If we're not seeing bait, we're not seeing walleyes out on the edges of these things, we're just not seeing anything, we'll go, hey, you know what? Let's actually look at what the basin is. What does this whole area look like around us? And let's not just keep beating our head against the wall, driving and looking at every spot, because there's so many of them in this area. Let's go 6-8 miles down the lake, because this area looks different than, oh man, look at, as we're pulling up to look at this spot, there's hooks, boom, 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 boom. Oh man, there's a big school of walleyes here. Oh, there's a school of bait that's suspended 10 feet off the bottom. Voila, here's cap. So that's like, okay, this is the area we want to focus on, because that's where the life is. So it was a really big learning lesson to me when we figured this stuff out, that it's not, if you go to Canadian Lake, know that they're often very complex and very diverse, and just what the depth of the water in the basin can be often dictate how much life is in that particular area. And this holds true for, some of the crappie fishing that's happening up there, smallmouth, walleyes, of course. It's huge for walleye, and northern pike and muskies. It's all the fish seem to do the same thing.
Jeremy, that is a great point to make. And there's actually, I don't know if you guys, there's actually a map of Lake Vermilion behind me in the background here. I don't know how well you guys can see that, but it's also a multi-basin lake, right? There's like 7 basins on the lake they're all unique as far as depths, water clarity, right? And one thing that I've learned, and actually Minnetonka, which is a metro area lake that I also guide on, even though it's not a Canadian shield water, it is definitely a multi-basin lake where there's a whole bunch of basins that lay out differently as far as their depths, but also their water clarity. And you're 100% right, where these basins are almost all like their individual like little worlds, right? And sometimes on Vermilion, like we'll be on a hot bite and it'll just be all the way across the lake, right? It's just, the muskies are just going bananas. But there are a lot of times, and certainly with that open water bite too, where a particular basin is lit up and one's not, and it can change like over a course of a few days. And one of the things I'll look for with that is when we start early in the morning, I'm always watching for like mayfly slicks with where those bugs are coming up, because depending on water temperature and light penetration and everything else, right, those hatches can happen in different basins during, you know, different like days on the calendar, right? So it's like they're hatching over here and this basin's like super hot right now. The bite's here, right? And then that dries up, and then there's a more predominant hatch over there. But even in the summertime with with the rock bite, there's a lot of times where like you could have two guys, like there's in the behind my head there's one giant basin you guys can probably see, right? Oop. Right. Oh, this is so hard. Right there. Called Big Bay, right? And so it's one of the bigger basins on the lake. And then Fraser Bay is another one that's very similar to it. But they're different basins, and they're not very far away, you know, as the crow flies from each other at all, like just a few miles, right? I mean, they're almost connected in a way at some point. But there are definitely times during the season where you could take two guys of equal, or you could even just, let's just say I could clone myself, right? And I got two Joshes out there, and I got the same bucktail on, fishing the same type of like just juicy prime A, like rock reefs. And like Josh in Big Bay is destroying muskies, having all kinds of action, right? But Josh in Fraser Bay is struggling, and he's maybe getting lazy follows, and he's not doing anything wrong. He's got the right bucktail on, and he's fishing the right type of structure. But Big Bay is just lit up, and Fraser Bay is not. You know, and sometimes another thing that can, you know, play into it, and I think with that example it does, is just like how much wind do you have, right? Like sometimes in a bigger, more wide open basin of a lake, you know, you can have a lighter wind, but still have like enough wave action, right, to like fire those fish up on the spots, position them where they're supposed to be, and have them be more active. Where, you know, if you're in a smaller basin, or maybe, you know, if the basin runs, you know, it's a long east-west shoot or whatever, but the wind's south, like you just don't get that much wind in that basin. It's like it's not enough to like fire those fish up. But in the next basin over that runs more north-south, or it's just a wider area, it just gets things moving around more, and those fish are more active. And sometimes it can be water clarity, sometimes it can be shade lines, it can be lots of different things. But definitely it's a lesson. And as much as I'm like talking about this with confidence, I get painful reminders all the time sometimes when I just, you know, you marry, especially follows. Sometimes they lead you down the wrong road, right? You're in one basin and you're moving lots of fish, and little you know, if you were like one basin over, like those things are eating, right? But those follows keep you married to where you are. So that's a tough one. But just wanted to touch on that a little bit. Are we supposed to let people ask questions at some point, by the way?
I think we should open it up. So if anybody has questions in this, Josh and I have been rambling quite a bit, but it's, you know, whatever. We're pumped to talk about muskies here too. But we do have a first question here, and this is from Matt Liu. Hey, Matt, thank you for asking this. He says, do you know differences on why Solix is running on G3 and Helix is on a different series, G4, on the new Hummingbirds? Trying to understand if one is better equipped to handle live when it comes out. I can just jump into this, Josh, and if you got anything else to say. So Solix, it was an introduction after Helix was. So it was Onyx was the first touchscreen version that Hummingbird came out with, and then they came out with Solix following that. So in terms of years of being on the marketplace, Solix is just lagging a year behind. So Gen 3 Solix is the newest thing. From what I understand, I don't know much about live. I've just heard rumors like a lot of everybody else has. But when I've seen on some of the packaging, if you pull off the sticker, the new live will be compatible with all Solix units, Gen 1 and going forward Apex, as well as the Gen 3 Helix and Gen 4 Helix. So with live, you should be able to, with the Gen 3, be able to handle that. And I believe the processors in those are much faster in the G3, G4 Helix, and the G2 and G3 Solix.
I got nothing to add to that. Jeremy's going to be a little more privy to probably any inside intel than me on that one. So, and
you know, if you're looking at those units, so I run Solix. I don't know do you run Solix or Helix, Josh?
I got Helix.
Helix. So when I first got on Solix, I was really frustrated with it because it's a different operating system. Now that I'm used to it, having the touchscreen capabilities is like, when I jump in Jimmy or Al's boat that have Helix, I'm like, oh my gosh, this thing is just driving me nuts. I just want to be able to push buttons, drag stuff, just like your phone. So once you got used to Solix and you understand the operating system, it is a really amazing piece of equipment. But with that, we're going to have to jump to a quick commercial. So think of your questions, send them in. And when we break from this commercial, we'll be answering a few more.
Hey everybody, Bobby Belmonte here from Peterborough Pro Tackle. We're super excited to be part of our first spring fishing and boat show here. We're also super excited to let you know that we're going to be expanding our store, knocking down the walls, and bringing you guys one of the biggest and best muskie sections in Southern Ontario. One of our in-store specials this weekend is 20% off all Daiwa products in store. For you muskie guys, there's a Daiwa Tatula 300 size reel that would be an awesome choice to pair up in your next muskie combo. What's unique about this product is that it's the only 300 size reel equipped with the T-Wing system, which is going to result in fewer backlashes and improved casting. A great pairing with this reel would be the Daiwa Pro Rex muskie rods, which are also included in our 20% off sale. We also carry a large selection of Shimano muskie rods here at the store, one of them being the Shimano Compre muskie rods. I'm really excited that they went back to their green design. I think it looks awesome. Great choice when you're looking for a new muskie rod. With the expansion of our muskie section means a lot of new muskie baits. So let's have a look at a few new ones that we have here in the store that are going to be awesome to put into your arsenal for this upcoming muskie season. Next up are some glide baits by Chaos Tackle. This one here is the Shum Shum Quickie, and this one is the Kodiak Round Nose. They have awesome action in the water when you twitch them, as well as they come in a number of cool colors. The other cool thing about these baits is that they run surprisingly shallow, unlike a lot of other glide baits. Check out our website at ptboprotackle.ca to take advantage of all our show specials, as well as to keep up to date with all the new products that we get here in the store. Also, check out Muskie Maniacs at muskiemaniacs.ca. They're having a 25% sale this weekend. Thanks guys, and enjoy the show.
Cool. I love looking at baits. You guys have some awesome retailers up there. And one of my favorite things, Josh, when you get to go up there, it'll be really fun. What's cool about that area is like the garage bait maker industry is like thriving. What muskie guys love is like really cool custom stuff. And it's not just a stick that's got a couple hooks on it. I mean, the paint jobs, the clear coating, it's like, oh man. So if you go up there, you want to bring lots of cash because there's stuff, all kinds of stuff. So we're going to keep going to the questions here. So if anybody has anything else, the last one was electronics related. And this one is going to come from Brad Smith. And Brad saying, as a new muskie angler, what kind of dollars are we looking at for equipment without breaking the bank or being disappointed with tackle breakage? Josh, I'll let you start with that since I answered the last one, and I'll chime in if I've got anything.
Sure. And boy, I guess, and this is maybe a bad habit that a lot of muskie anglers get into, is when you want it, you just don't look at the price tag. So, I will say that, I don't know, Jeremy, you can tell me whether you agree with this. It's like, obviously I'm assuming we're going to start with a rod and reel, or that's kind of part of what he's getting at here. And I think it's really hard to skimp on the reel. I just think that, you'll be disappointed. You're going to end up either not being able to fish the way you want because it's not fast enough, or it breaks because it can't withstand the resistance of what you're doing. So rods, while having a premium high-end rod is definitely, beneficial. I think that, that might be the side where you could find a pretty decent rod. There's more of a wide variety of prices, I guess I would say. And that would be my thought. Where that puts you at, I guess the other thing I would recommend is a lot of times if you buy them together, if you're going to go to a retailer, a lot of times you can find a deal somewhere, if you pair them up together at the same time. And normally the shows are a great place to do that. And there's probably somebody offering something, by the way. I'm guessing if you snoop around on the website of the show and the retailers that are there, somebody's probably offering a deal this weekend, I would imagine.
Yeah, and Brad, I'll add to that, and it's kind of like being a homeowner when you buy a home for the first time. You're going to go get the $79 Ryobi drill that ends up lasting a year, and then you're ticked off. And as you go down the road, of course, you get you start buying nice power tools because you know that you get what you pay for. So I totally understand the financial element of it, but when you skimp on Muskie equipment in particular, what you're getting when you pay less, you're typically getting something that's heavier, and you're also getting something that's not as durable. So what really, like Josh made a great point about getting a good reel. If you get a reel that's just got crummy gears inside of it, backlashing, you're learning how to do it. You backlash a really heavy bait, and you do that a few times, your clutch is shot, your gears are starting to round out, and the whole thing just gets sloppy, and you'll be ticked off. So if you spend some money on a good muskie reel that's designed for pulling, it can take a backlash here and there, you're gonna get a lot more life out of it. And if you spend a little more for a rod, you're gonna start to get some weight reduction. So again, muskie fishing it's like a marathon. You can go out for a couple hours in the evening, of course, and do it, but when you really get them, you're really the secret recipe to catching muskies. Obviously, this is a lot of details, but if you broke it down, it's working your ass off. That's how you catch muskies. You just put a lot of effort into it. And so to be able to do that, you need something that you can do that for a long time with. So St. Croix's got like their Premier Series. That's an American-made rod that you can get. It's still a bit expensive, but it's a good entry point. It's relatively light, and then you can go up from there. There's custom rod makers. There's a lot of rod makers that are making decent rods too at a pretty good price. So I agree with Josh. The reel's the one that's gonna fail you over time more quickly than the rod will. All right. Hope that answered your question. And now we've got Alex Stevens is jumping in. He says, "Hey Josh, early season in June on Lake Minnetonka. Where do you start, and how do you determine where the fish are throughout the month?"
Yeah, some of that will depend on what kind of a spring we've had. If we've had a really cold spring, which is like, even if we've had a cold spring, we don't have muskie opener in Minnesota till the first weekend in June compared to places like, Wisconsin, whatever. Or if you go further north, it's colder up there, right? So on Vermilion, a lot of times you'll find the fish in the spawning bays. And if we have a cold spring on Minnetonka, that's also where you would find them. They'll still be near or adjacent to spawning areas. But if we're already I'm going to say 68-degree water temps or above, which, being further south in the metro, we can be at those temperatures. A lot of times we are opener already. And so a lot of times I'm looking for suspended fish already, because they've already they've done their thing and they've moved out. And even if they're on the edges, I feel like pressure moves them out pretty quickly, just because the metro area lakes receive a lot more fishing pressure. And so once I'm on that bite, and I know I talked about this quite a bit already, I definitely still look for those hard to soft bottom transitions out there. Another thing that I'll look for is just deeper, structures that basically touch or adjacent to that open water. So instead of fishing an entire point, I would maybe just focus on the very tippy tip section of a very long point that extends out into one of those deeper basins. On Minnetonka, there's several really nice mid-lake humps out there that have weeds on them, but they have deep water all the way around them. And primarily I'm fishing open water, but if I'm going to fish structure, those are kind of the types that I focus on, just because they're adjacent to the open water, right? And so a lot of times they're the first thing they're going to wander up onto or relate to when they're out there. And then maybe the one other thing I would share that I think is overlooked, and I also think this can transfer to maybe some Canadian waters. But one, it's always, if the bite is suspended, first of all, we talked about how a lot of lakes, especially in Canada, Lake Vermilion's that way, Lake Minnetonka's this way, is they're multi-basin lakes. And so if there's a basin that has deeper water, especially one that holds, Cisco's, which Minnetonka doesn't, but a lot of other lakes do, that the principle still applies, but it's smaller, right? And if you can have a smaller basin, is always an easier place to start because there's just less middle of the lake for them to be in. And actually, in some of those basins, I feel like the fish are almost more concentrated when the bite is open water than when they're on structure, because you can stand out in the middle and be like, okay, like, I could circle my boat around out here. And if I had to fish like the weed line and the shoreline, like all the way around this basin, like that might take me like days, right? But I can like, even if I don't have the hard to soft bottom transitions mapped out there, I can mow the lawn and go back and forth out here, right? And cover the whole middle of the lake and maybe half of a day in this basin and feel like I've covered it fairly well. And so again, all those muskies, that are normally around that perimeter, if you drain them into the middle, if they pull off of it, it's like they're literally more concentrated, when they're out there. And anyway, where I was going to go with that is the other thing that can happen is if you don't have a smaller basin, sometimes you have situations like I call it a basin within a basin. So you might have there's a giant basin of the lake, but then there's maybe these big flat areas with shallow water. Cass Lake would be one that comes to mind that has a lot of those in Minnesota. Lake Minnetonka, though, which is what the question was originally about, definitely has a lot of those. And I call them sinkholes. They're basically, we have these big flats on Minnetonka. They're weeds. In Canada, it might not. It could still be weeds. It could be rock or something else. But there's a depression in the middle where there's deep water, right? But then there's shallow water all around it. And so it's a very confined. It's taking that smaller basin thing even to another extent where some of these little sinkholes are small enough where you can like cast across them. And so, especially with today's electronics, you can just motor in there to the middle of it. If there's a muskie like in the basin, like you're going to see them just right on your graph to the left or the right, and then you can waypoint them and start casting at them. So I think that'd be and I talked a little bit about, the process. I'm going to do the fastest to slowest with my hooking percentage baits. And I definitely, if we're casting in the open water that time of year, I lean a little bit harder on rubber. I also like the baby beaver baits, but the XL size, the bigger ones. So hopefully, I think that's a pretty extensive answer. Hopefully I covered it.
I think you nailed it. We've got another one here, Josh, from Douglas, and he's saying, can you comment on boat selection, not brand, but bass versus walleye, boat style, trolling requirements in boat, etc.?
Yeah. Do you want to take this one first?
Or do you want I can kind of give you an idea on like what Josh will have a different thought on this because Josh is a professional muskie fisherman. I fish for carp and catfish and muskies and bass and everything, but I run a tiller boat. I think that to me is the most versatile boat that I could fish with to do a little bit of everything. So I've got I run a Pro Guide with a 90 horse Merc on the back of it. And that thing to me is just a Corvette. If I want to troll, having that shorter boat just allows me to, I can contour troll so well, especially in Canada. That's one of my favorite things to do is go up in the fall and contour troll. And with a wheel boat, you can't achieve that same tightness that you can with the tiller boat. It's a big open floor plan, so it's really nice for muskie fishing. The downside to a tiller is travel. If you're going to travel across Lake St. Clair in a tiller boat, you know what that's like. You're going to, you get beat up. It's not like having a full windshield, but we also have bigger windshield style boats that we set up then with Jimmy has a bass boat. It's a really nice casting boat. It's fantastic for casting for muskies, but we don't ever really take that boat into Canada for our multi-species trip in case we end up bottom bouncing for walleye or we're going to troll for deep pike or muskie troll. It's just not a really great boat for trolling. So, we have other boats set up then with the big motor, the kicker, a shallow water anchor on the front. And then a lot of times we'll use the kicker in gear and we'll steer with the bow mount trolling motor. So if you're looking for something to me that's all around, I would look at getting, and you're going to be traveling big water, a windshield boat with a kicker and the big motor, and then having an electric steer in the front that you can guide your boat around. But if you're really into trolling, smaller bodies of water, a tiller is just, it's unbelievable.
Yeah, and I can share my thoughts on that too. I mean, I think a lot of it has to do with where, like, and Jeremy kind of hit on it already. It's just like, where do you fish, right? And I'm assuming that we're just talking muskie specific here, and so, he kind of covered some of the advantages of the tiller already, and one of them, really nice too, that I don't know if he touched on, is just how open the boats are for, in muskie fishing, we generally have a lot of rods. And slowly all the boat companies are catching up to, making big enough rod lockers to actually accommodate like 9 and 10 foot rods that we're using these days. But you got to have somewhere to lay all those, and having a nice open floor plan on both sides gives you a nice, ledge there, and just a lot more space. Also, if you're walking a fish around the boat, fighting a fish, right, there's less obstacles there. And I think definitely in skinnier water, they're pretty friendly. And then the bass boat, I would say one of the advantages to those is when it comes to figure eight technique, that's generally how you're going to be the lowest to the water. And, I got to be careful. Like I do a class on figure eights. I do like a virtual class, and it's 3 hours long. Okay. So I'm like very particular about figure eights and the situational and stuff. But one little thing I'll share about figure eight technique is, you want to get the widest, most giant possible turns that you can get. Those are the figure eights that catch the most and the biggest fish. And sometimes when I do seminars, I'll actually take a marker and tape it Sharpie on the end of a fishing rod, and then I'll draw on the floor. So, usually I use a dry erase so you can wipe it off. But anyway, but I do that to kind of demonstrate how the mechanics of your body can basically affect how big that circle is you draw on the floor with the marker. And one of the points I drive home with that is the lower you are to the water, the wider your turn will be. And so there's things you can do with your body as far as like bending down. And I don't want to get too far off the question because there's timing and everything else with that too. But anyway, you're just lower to the water with a bass boat. And so it's definitely, you're going to get sweet figure eights, wider figure eights, just because you're lower to the water with those. The downside to that is sometimes if you're on really big water, which is where I spend most of my time fishing, in a big wind, it can be too much for that style of a boat where you're drinking them over. And I'm one of those guys, like we're going out like 50-mile-an-hour winds. It's not stopping me. Like we are going, because those can be great days of muskie fishing. Sometimes when it's borderline dangerous to be out there, those are some of my best days on the water. Right. Which is why I kind of run what I run, which is kind of what Jeremy was talking about. I got a wheel boat. I got a fiberglass boat that's heavier, right? That'll hold its line even in a big wind. And I got a kicker in the back corner so that when I troll, I can still kind of, have the tiller effect a little bit. Definitely not going to be, quite as precise as a tiller still when we're trolling structure. But another thing I like about it is I have it back there, and because we cast a lot in big wind, I have my kicker back where I stand. And so I'll run my kicker just straight, like lightly in gear idling, to help hold the boat in a big wind. And then I can use the trolling motor to kind of bump us in and out. And when I use the two motors together on both ends of the boat, I feel like I can hold us on almost anything. So yeah, and then the windshield's obviously nice if you got bugs, precipitation, hail, snow, all that stuff, which I also experience out there. I've grown to love my windshield. So
you bet. Looks like Matt's got another one here, and he's asking, where do you recommend mounting electronics? At the front of the boat, which side? I fish 95% off the left side, and recommendations on mounting brackets and brands.
Sorry, shoot, it went off. But so we're looking at brands and where to mount them.
So he's asking, where do you recommend mounting the electronics on the front of the boat? Which side? And he's saying most of the time he's fishing off the left side, and he's looking at mounting brackets and brands. Yeah,
so that's all going to be personal preference. I mean, I can tell you for me, and by the way, maybe like the bigger question here too is, he brings up a really good point. I'm assuming that Matt fishes where he reels with his right hand. And in my opinion, this is just something for everybody to think about. There is a right side and a wrong side of the boat to fish off of. And you wouldn't think something like that would matter, but I think it actually matters a fair amount. And I'm guessing Matt reels with his right hand. And I do feel like the port side or the left-hand side of your boat if you reel with your right hand, is the better side of the boat to fish off of. And one of the reasons why is you're going to get much better hook sets off of that side of the boat. I got a water bottle here. Let's see, man, it's so hard to get stuff in. So let's see here. All right, so there it is. I got to twist my hand this way. See that seam right here between my, oh man, that's hard. Between my thumb and my fingers, there's that gap. That's the weak point in my grip. That's where this bottle is going to come out of my hand, okay? And when you hold on to anything, whether it's a rod, a beer, whatever, right? There's a strong point and a weak point to your grip, and it's that opening. And so if you reel with your right hand and you fish off the opposite side of the boat, that weak point of your grip actually faces the fish. And so if you've ever been muskie fishing and you get hit and you get that awkward hit where it feels like the rod almost got pulled out of your hand and you didn't get a very good hook set and maybe you missed it, that's why, because it did almost get pulled out of your hand because that weak point of your grip was facing the fish. And so if you fish off, if you reel with your right hand and you fish off that port side, the strong point of your grip faces the fish. And so when the fish hits, it actually pulls it into your hand instead of out it. So it pulls it into your hand and away from your body, which is perfect for you to just instinctually come back the other way. So when you're looking at those electronics, wherever they're mounted and not paying attention mid-retrieve, right, you still hammer the fish. I'll also add that helps with figure eights, because if you sweep left to right and you reel with your left hand, like most people do when they come to the boat, the movement of the boat going forward will actually help with the acceleration, where if you're fishing off the opposite side of the boat, that same sweep is going to actually, the movement of the boat, you're going to be going with the grain of the boat instead of against it, and actually slows you down and really messes up your figure eight transition at the boat. One of those little things that we were talking about, right? That matters a lot, but I see lots of guys like just fishing wherever, right? And by the way, that'd all be reversed if you reel with your left hand. You should be off the other side of the boat. Back to the electronics, I think it's personal preference. For me, I also fish off that side of the boat, but I'm in the back. And I have one mounted, it's custom rigged, but I have it, on a big ram ball so I can adjust the angles. And there's other great mounts out there too, but I have it right at my feet just in front of me. So as I kind of watch for my follow and my figure eight, I can shift my eyes pretty quickly once I'm done with my figure eight to the graph, and fire back out. And I got 3 different ones I'm looking at. The other 2 are at my wheel. I think I don't know, Jeremy, if you have a specific mount that you use.
So we do, it really depends on the style of what boat you have. So, I generally rig about 3 boats a year. Balls Out makes a mount that I really like, so you can get different arm lengths and it can articulate to be wherever it is. So most of ours I'll mount right of center. That's because we're using a lot of our trolling motors are coming in on the port side, so it's just a function of where you can actually put it. Now, if you've got a bass boat, we will do flush mount or stackable. Precision Sonar makes a really good stackable unit. That's a really tight package. It's centered in the boat then, so you can adjust that to be looking straight down. But I use the Balls Out on arms, so I can just adjust. I can do it however I want, but I'm fishing on the left side most of the time too, but I can angle it. So for me, it's not tiring. My foot, I run it from the front and run a cable drive, so I can just look down and it's right in front of my face. And I run, another tip I'll just say is that if you fish in the front, like me, a lot of people I'll see buy like a Helix 7 and a Helix 9 for their boat or something like that. They'll get 2 screens and they'll put the big screen on the console and they'll put the small screen on the bow. Now, if you fished off the back like Josh was, it makes sense to have the big screen on the console. But when you're standing in the front, you've got this fish finder now that's 6 feet away from you. You're better off to have the big screen so you can actually see what you're looking at. Because when you're at the wheel, the screen is right in front of your face, right? So I run a 15-inch screen on the bow instead of running 2 smaller ones because I can split stuff up. But anyway, that's kind of my 2 cents.
I'll add one other thing too. When you're strategizing it, I would make sure that if you're going to put it anywhere on the floor or whatever, make sure it's in a clean spot. Where you're not going to be fumbling or dealing with it, especially during figure eights. Another little figure eight thing, you always want to get your toes as close to the gunnel as you can. The closer you are to the edge of the boat, the wider your turn will be, and you don't want your graph interfering with that. And then the other thing is be thinking about what side of the dock you normally pull up on, and if this thing going to be hanging over. Some people have them mounted outside of the boat a little bit, right? Which is kind of neat when you're fishing, but when you're pulling up to a dock, it could be a really bad situation if you forget.
Yeah, Josh, this is a good one here. Oh, Brent. Hey, Brent. Good to hear from you. Hey, he's asking, when it comes to lure size, how big is too big?
Boy, I don't know. I feel like the trend, at least in Minnesota for a long time, is things just keep getting, bigger and bigger. I don't know. I mean, the biggest ones I throw are 2-pounders, the Muskie Innovation 2-pounders. Oh, there we go, Jeremy.
Is that too big? Okay. I bought this at the show a couple of years ago. Our guy made it for me there.
Yeah.
I guess catches fish on the St. Lawrence. So
yeah, and there you go. So I don't know. I think the right now the limit is just on the equipment, right? Like in us, like physically, if we're casting, trolling is a little bit less of an issue if you got a rod that can put up with it. And I think it depends on what your goal is. Like, are you out there for the biggest fish in the pond? Because if you have that attitude, that's like a whole different mindset. And yeah, it might mean putting on like the biggest bait you can find, right? If that's all you care about. And I know some guys who are very good big fishermen, and I mean that's their deal. Like they don't catch very many fish in a year, but they don't care. Like the ones they catch are the ones. Like they catch some of the biggest fish in North America, and if they catch a few of those and take their lumps the whole rest of the season, it was a great year. And so, I think there's definitely times, and I know Jeremy touched on it earlier in the seminar, where, downsizing your baits is definitely going to get you more bites. And don't get me wrong. I mean, I've caught some pretty big fish on not very big baits too. One thing I like about bigger baits is, or just in general, is I just say, no matter what size bait you use, I would always err on using the biggest hook that you can get away with that doesn't like hurt the action of the bait. And a lot of baits have a threshold, like top waters, you put too big of a hook on and they sink, right? And some crankbaits and gliders, they can change the, either the depth that they run at, or it just starts to kill the action, or the hooks start to foul on each other, and now you're having a wasted cast. But I would always err on the side of using the biggest hook you can get away with for hooking percentages.
I like it. All right. Anthony's chiming in and he's saying, how do you fish in open water when you're fishing for suspended fish? Do you wander around, or are you looking for something in particular? We hammered down on this quite a bit earlier on, so I would definitely recommend Anthony jumping back and watching some of the beginning of this, because Josh had some really incredible information about how to find fish in open water. And we can, if you just want to maybe touch base one more time, Josh, about edges being the real key there.
Yeah, I'll just do the quick 30-second bullet point because we talked about it quite a bit. But, I would start with, looking for hard to soft bottom transitions out in the middle of the lake. An easy, quick way to do that is to use AutoChart Live. If you have it, you can actually map the bottom composition of the lake with your graph. Obviously, you're looking for pods of bait fish out there, paying attention to the depth that the bait is riding at. And nowadays, I mean, like we talked about, not so much in the open water aspect, but it's true there too, is with the electronics the way they are, it's like now we end up, fishing specific fish anyway. So there's not too many times when I'm out there fishing that bite where if you do it for a lot of times, not very long, you start seeing muskies, like there's a muskie, it's right there, and you scroll a cursor over on it, and put a waypoint on it and start working the fish.
Love it. All right. Do we have any more popping through? We sure do. Oh, Mike from Handlebars. Good to see you or hear from you, Mike. Mike Parker's asking, lots of great info. Guys, miss seeing you this year, Jeremy. Hey, Josh, I know you said you don't have a favorite lure, but do you guys have a favorite type of bite, like bucktails over topwater or a big rubber bite?
I mean, and I'm assuming by bite he means like a favorite pattern.
What's your favorite when a muskie? If you could catch a muskie anyway, what's it going to be?
Well, I mean, if you put it that way, I'm going to say topwater for sure, just because it's so fun, like visually, right? And if you can guarantee that I actually get to catch the fish, there could be a lot of heartbreak with that too. As far as if we were going to say the funnest pattern, I mean, I really enjoy fishing that open water bite because I feel like, at least on the waters that I fish, like the biggest fish in our systems, I think are open water related. like a much higher percentage of the time than the rest of the fish. And so like, especially on vermilion, I feel like when we're fishing that open water bite, it's nice because like there's a time when all the fish are like doing the same thing with the big fish. And so there's enough fish out there for you to bump into them. But deep down, like for me, I also feel like we are fishing for the biggest fish in the lake right now, and we get to catch other ones along the way. And most years, I mean, we do get to, you know, put some 55+ inch fish in the boat. And just because of that size potential, that's probably the bite that I like the best. And a close second would be late fall. And it's for the same reason when the tulipies and whitefish are spawning. Again, that's the one time when those big fish that are out there that spend a lot more time in the open water, in my opinion, they get forced kind of to come up onto the structures and become more vulnerable because their food source is up there spawning.
That's really cool. Well, for me, I love throwing bucktails, Mike. Like it's my favorite thing. It's just maybe because I really love bass fishing so much. But if I can get a single or a double color 8, number 8 Colorado, and go just cast that thing out and reel it as fast as I can. When muskies are biting little bucktails that are going at warp speed, it's almost like that combination where you get the top water thing going, but you get to see how fast fish can actually move. Like that makes that to me just makes my head spin when you can see those things just be bolts of lightning after your bait and crack those really fast moving baits, man. I just think that is visually like, oh, that's what I love about muskie fishing. So that's my 2 cents. Let's see if we got another one here. All right. Nelson's saying, is there finesse muskie techniques? For example, like bass fishing, we have the Ned rig, drop shot, Nico, etc. 100% there is. If you want to take it, Josh, I can add some stuff too.
Yeah. And I mean, I guess, you know, it depends on how you want to define finesse a little bit too. But for me, I just think there's like when I think finesse, or I tend to think a little bit more tough conditions. You know, less aggressive way of fishing. And again, that process that I talked about earlier in the seminar has probably led me to that way where we're having action in the back of the boat. And so to me, that my thoughts drift to like sunny day strategies, tough bite. And so even though it might not seem like finesse, in my mind, like tough days and rubber go together like bacon and eggs, right? Like, you know, anytime we have, you know, no wind, no clouds, rubber is definitely a bait that seems to get bit. And I know that like a big bulldog might not like seem like a finesse bait, but it's a great bait for like a more neutral or tougher bite. And maybe something that's a little bit smaller that seems to kind of have magical properties for me, as I would say, a tube. You know, like the Red October tubes, they've always been really good for me on tough bites. Also sometimes sight fishing when you can't get them and they're laying up on the rocks and they're just not moving on anything else. Sometimes I can get them to eat a tube when they won't eat anything else. And then also that's you know, if you're going to throw back at a fish that followed something else, that's also like one that I would lean on pretty hard. So go ahead, Jeremy. No,
all that stuff makes sense. Of course, you think finesse, you think of soft plastics naturally. And so finesse to me a lot of it has to do with the equipment too. So Josh catches, for the record, way, way, way more muskies and way bigger muskies than I do. But I love fishing for them with smaller stuff. I just like doing that. I of course want to catch big fish, but I'm also looking for action in a lot of cases too. You know, for my job, if I can go get, you know, 3 45-inch muskies or a little bit better, we've got a great piece of content. So I might be on muskies this week, but then next week I've got to be figuring out how to catch channel catfish in a reservoir. And then the next week I'm trying to figure out how to fish suspended crappies in a basin, right? So for me, it's always about finding ways that I can get bit really quick and something that's new and different and learning. So I fished with a lot of heavy bass tackle. I've talked about the St. Croix downsizer rods a lot, but Josh mentioned a tube. This is a bait here. This might not look like much of a musky bait here. This is, if I'm fishing the far north for big pike, this is absolutely one of my best presentations ever. And if muskies are in heavy cover, this lure can go through cover like you cannot even believe how well this thing goes through cover. And you'll notice I've just got a 30-pound titanium leader on here. So it's just a short shank of leader. This thing cuts through weeds, and I'll fish this on like 50-pound braid on like a 7.5-foot bass flipping stick, or you know, a 710, something like that. And the idea is I'll get this thing into cover and I'll get it hung on a weed. The idea is to get it hung up on a weed, and you shake it. You take your rod tip and you shake it and you make that plant move. And it's like, okay, this is alerting fish that something is in the area here, right? Something's going on. And when you snap it with a little slack in the line, the bait will jump up and fall and will start making its way through. And a lot of times you're seeing it. And what happens is big white bait is falling through the water and it's just gone. It goes black and the fish just swallow it, right? So it's not a big deal, but it's very intrusive. A lot of musky baits don't get into the fish's face where you're sitting there poking at them. I mean, this is right in their face and they're buried in heavy cover. So this is a really great finesse deal. And the other one I like, this is a big bait here, but the X-Wrap, in my opinion, it is the finest multi-species fish catching lure on the planet. The size 4 is maybe the most deadly thing that we found in recent years for spring crappies, spring bluegills. The 8 and the 10 are the best smallmouth lures on the planet in the spring, and they catch walleyes. But the bigger sizes, I've caught tons of muskies and big pike on these things. And it's the idea of a suspending jerkbait, baits that hang in the water. It's not baits that slowly rise. It's not baits that slowly sink. It's baits that can do a lot of different things, a lot of triggers, achieve depth to where the fish are and hang. And this is one of the most finessey things ever. So the X-Wrap, the original X-Wrap, what makes it unique is it's got a feather trailer. And like Josh was talking about, little things make a difference. I can't tell you how many muskies I've caught on this feather trailer. It's unbelievable. The last time I went muskie fishing this year, we caught 5 of them. And guess what? All 5 of the fish were caught on this. It adds profile to the bait and it gives the fish a target. When you're fishing cold water, you'll see smallmouth do it all the time. You'll see walleyes do it all the time. Muskies do this. They come up, you see them kind of going like this. They're looking at a bait that's sitting there hanging. And I've talked so many muskies into it. They come up, they're looking at it, they slow down, you twitch it, you shoot it around a little bit. They kind of get a little more interested. They're going like this. And then pretty soon they just go, you just see the little bit of feather right in their beak, and you can lift up and you stick them right there. But that's a really finesse deal. It's not necessarily the best thing for catching really big fish, but I'm telling you that little deal right there is accounted for lots and lots and lots of muskies for me every year.
I learned something there.
All right. Janitor Bob, moon underfoot, moon overhead. Which do you prefer for night fishing? This is all Josh. This is right up your alley, bud.
Boy, I would, well, some of that's going to depend on the phase of the moon that you're in too, in my opinion. So I do, especially at night, I would rather at night with a full moon personally, and don't get me wrong, there's exceptions. Like I did have an amazing night of fishing, like one of the most amazing nights ever I've had in my life. So there's always that one exception that was a full moon and the moon was bright up in the sky, right? So it was overhead and it was bright. But generally, my experience, and I do fish a lot at night for muskies, is like the bite is very good as the moon is rising. And once it gets all the way up in the sky and it's bright, the vast majority of the time, I feel like the bite kind of shuts down unless, we have one of those nights where it's cloudy and then the moon's kind of going in and out. And I feel like that kind of that light penetration change kind of creates little mini windows of activity. And the other exception is there was one night on guiding on Lake Vermilion and we just got lucky that we figured it out right away. But we actually ended up having an 8-fish night, and with the moon up bright that I don't like, right? But what we figured out was, Vermilion, like a lot of Canadian fisheries, we have 365 islands on the lake. So there's islands everywhere. And these fish were sitting so at night when the moon's bright, you'll have these periods where the trees on the island will actually create shade and the water will be all flat and black and just pitch dark. And then there'll be this edge where it's the moonlit kind of shimmery bright water and these muskies. And we just kind of noticed it on the first couple we caught working around an island. Wow, these fish are sitting in the shadows, right on the edge, looking into the light. And if you just cast right down that seam, that's where they're at and that's where they're eating. And so we figured that out, and kind of going back to, my example of daytime fishing, of spot hopping, how fast it gets. So we just literally started driving island to island, and we would just find that seam and we'd cast down it. And that was it. We'd make 3 casts into the next island. And I mean, there was pretty much a fish on like every one for like 8 spots in a row while the window was open. So I think that probably answers the question. I mean, if people ask about it more, I mean, I can talk about the moon a lot because there's
we've got one more here too, Josh, that is just asking, can you explain moon phases and what you're looking for in simple terms?
Sure. So, so first I'm going to say that while I'm a big fanatic about the moon, I do not think that, and I focus on like the day of the full moon, 3 days before and 3 days after, and then the day of the new moon and 3 days before and 3 days after. Okay. But I'm going to tell you, I don't think the fishing is any better on those days than any other. I think how the overall fishing is going to be dictated on the water temperature, just how the overall bite and the weather and things like that are. What those moon days do is they help you determine the when these fish are going to bite. And for me, that's like a really, like, because generally in my boat, I feel like I know where the fish, like we're fishing over muskies a really high percentage of the time. And generally we're showing them the things that they like to chew on. And the rest of it's kind of a timing thing, right? So if I can figure out that, then you kind of know when to be knocking on everybody's door, right? And so the unique thing that happens in those days, 3 days before and 3 days after both of those lunar events, is those are the only days of the 29.5-day lunar calendar when moonrise and moonset will happen within an hour and a half or less of sunrise and sunset. So like just an example, like coming into the full moon. So like 3 days before the full moon, moonrise will be before sunset. It'll probably be like an hour and 20 minutes or so before. And so moonrise and moonset being like a key time that muskies feed, right? And then sunrise and sunset also being one of those, along with a light intensity change, right? When you take two events and then you stack them into a window of time that's not, as long, you put them closer to each other, it seems to really intensify the window and make it much more predictable. So a lot of times the window is actually, the time between those two events happen. And then the second day before the full moon, they get closer, right? So the window is not as long, but it gets more intense. And when you get to the day of the full moon, a lot of times there's only like a 7-minute window. And so I also think that I want to stress that like sometimes that's what you get, and it is super intense, but this is a precision deal. Like you want to be making the cast at the waypoint, at the fish, at the minute, right? That these things happen, because sometimes the windows are that short. They're like 7 minutes in time. And one other thing I want to share, because it's important, and I think it's like really overlooked by a lot of people, is so while that gets you to the when, if you buy into the idea that muskies are affected by the moon, which I do because my catch logs, reflect it. I see it on the water all the time. Days where, you go 16 hours with nothing and then you catch 3 and like 10 casts at moonrise or whatever, right? But if you buy into the idea that the fish are affected by the moon, when the moon orbits around Earth, it's actually not a circle-shaped orbit. It's an oval. And so there's actually points distance-wise from the Earth where the moon is very, very close, and other times where it's very far away in that orbit. It's significant. It's significant enough that that's why sometimes when you're driving down the road at night and you look at the moon and you see it coming up on the horizon, you're like, wow, the moon looks giant today, right? And other times it's just a little white dot in the sky. That's because of the distance. Like when it's closer, it looks that much bigger. And so that if you buy into the idea that these fish are affected by the moon, then doesn't it make sense that the moon would have maybe more of an effect, more of an intense effect on the fish, right, when it's closer to Earth, and less of an effect where it's further away? And so what I look for, and this only happens a handful of times every year, is you get this double whammy where you have a full moon or a new moon, okay?
Hey, Josh, we got to jump to a break here right now, so we have to
go ahead. Anyway, and it's also closest to Earth, right? And so we get this double whammy, and it's crazy. Like I think like 14 of the last 17 years, the biggest fish in my boat is caught on one of those days.
Wow.
The big
wow. I listened to both you guys. It's been very thorough. I have to admit. The one thing though that one question that came in on the boats and what you prefer, and it's just going to people's own personal, what they can afford, what room they have in their car, in their garage, what kind of vehicle they got to tow. But like Like, do you guys ever put muskies in your live wells just to resuscitate them? Because I know I was out with Jim Fleming last year, and he's a guide. He's got this big cooler in the back of his boat set up with an aeration system, and then he releases the fish right after they get all rejuvenated again. So do you guys do that, or are you instantly releasing them?
Well, in Minnesota, we actually, like, our laws don't allow us to do that.
Yeah.
I know there's been talk, because I know, especially like on Lake St. Clair is a lake where like almost all the guides on that big water have these giant release tanks. And from what I've heard, like, it's been like the fish that come out of those release tanks are like amazingly like refreshed. So I think, I know it's something that's been talked about with our DNRs, whether they will eventually maybe allow us to do that if we have something like of that size that's set up for the fish. But right now, I think technically we're not supposed to be doing that in Minnesota.
Yeah, and like, that's the reason why I was saying that is I was wondering, is there something? It sounds like you just get away with by rigging something up in a cooler to allow, because I don't think there's that many boats out there that have a cooler that big. For some of these fish are monsters, right? So, hey, listen, guys, I'm not trying to cut you off. Honestly, I would love to have you guys on. I think you guys go on forever. I can't believe the amount of questions. Obviously, there's a lot of people interested in what you have to say. And that's why I want to invite you back on a one-on-one basis. I like to have both of you guys on different times over the next few weeks and talk to these guys, and we'll give them enough notice. You do want to sign yourselves up for people that are watching on our newsletter, so that way you'll get notices when we have these opportunities and these talks with these guys. And I assure you, those emails are not being sold to the duck cleaning guys. So, anyways, guys, I just want to say, you guys are incredible. Like, honestly, Josh, it was very, very important. I can't wait to meet you in person. I can't wait to have you up here next year. With the Muskie Room, usually we go a lot longer, just so you know, and not just that, because we have like 4 different platforms of presentations. We have a big tank, we have closed room seminars, we have the Outdoor Canada stage. Like, we have a lot of presentation areas, and Jeremy will attest to that. So anyways, this is piling everything on top of each other, and as a live, we can't really overlap you guys, right? So, but I do want to thank you guys. Honestly, it's incredible. Josh, just want to give you a plug for where, if a guy wants to come in on your guide with you, right? Hopefully the borders open up. How do they do that? Where do they?
Yeah, it's my website is promuskieguide.com, Muskie with an IE. And one other thing I would just share is I also, with Nick Linder, we put out and it's free. It's a muskie fishing newsletter called Muskie Insider. That we spell with a Y. We won't get into why, but anyway, it's a great free resource of muskie information. It gets emailed to your inbox every week for free.
Well, that's cool. And Jeremy, you're always reachable, but you only want to give these guys an email address or something they can reach out to you for questions they might have after the show.
Yeah, the best way to reach out to us is you can visit anglingedge.com. So we've got a ton of stuff there. In terms of resources, you want to read stuff, you want to watch videos, you've got all that stuff, and there's the means to contact us there. Also, anglingbuzz.com. We've got tons of content. We do all kinds of species-specific stuff, whether it's muskies like we're talking about now, walleyes, panfish. So really great multi-species resource for anything that swims in fresh water. We've got it on those 2 sites, Angling Edge and Angling Buzz, and you can reach me there.
Dude, I just another thing too. Another note, I know it's more personal, but like basically towards James and the condolences to his family. It's a big loss for Ron, and he was I watched that whole presentation that they did for the funeral, and I remember all those clips. I can honestly tell you, I can remember so many of those clips. Like, I grew up, like, I still am a huge fan of the Linders and everything they do. It's absolutely incredible. Like, it's just it's got so many different components, science, and it's a lot of my heritage is there, and it actually makes you almost bring tears to my eyes right now. Ron's a great person, and you know what? My condolences to the whole Linder group and Gant family. You guys are phenomenal people. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you. I'll pass those along to the family. Yeah.
All right, guys. Thank you very much, and we're gonna be coming back in just a few minutes with a kayak presentation. The first time we've been doing, we've done this a few years back. We actually set up a pond at the show, and we used to have like presentations in the pond. And with kayak in Ontario, it's actually really taking off in a big way. And like through the seminars, we've had all kinds of kayak questions coming through, like whether it's salmon or whether it was for all the species of fish, like including muskie. It's really becoming very, very popular. It's an inexpensive way to get yourself on the water, but it's also a great way to sneak up on those real big fish. So, and get you into some of those areas that's a lot harder to get to with a big size boat. So we'll be right back with the Full Marine and their presentation of kayak fishing in just a few minutes.
So the Zillion is actually probably 6 or 7 years old right now. And it's pretty cool to see what they've done. You know, the one thing about Daiwa is that they have always strived to be better. They have never been complacent on where they are. They're constantly looking to upgrade, to make something better. They have never just settled for, hey, we have a really good product. We have a really good Tatula. We have a really good Zillion. They have constantly pushed the envelope to be better. And really what they've done now is they've come out with the new Zillion SV. They have basically taken all the technology that they have learned over the last 6, 8, 10 years and everything they've done, and they've improved on it and made it better. And now they've crammed everything they possibly can into one reel, and that's the new Zillion SV. It's basically the culmination of all the different technology that they've come up with and just crammed everything into one little sexy package. It's kind of crazy. What they've done with the new Zillion SV is they basically have a new system. What that does is it gives you the characteristics of the SV, the castability. It's a 2-stage braking system that gives you the braking like an SV does, where I can sit there and cast this bait. And I'll show you right now. I can cast this thing and take my thumb off the spool, and I just made a long cast and it does not backlash. That's a big long, I just cast that thing 50 yards, 40, 50 yards, and never put my thumb on the spool. Something about the gearing in it has really, really fine-tooth gearing, which makes it really, really smooth. Now it feels really good. The castability of it is insane too. The new Zillion SV.
What lies beneath can no longer hide. New Mega Imaging Plus uses high-frequency sonar to show you fish and structure up to 200 feet below your boat and 200 feet out to either side. No more secrets, no more guesswork, just a clearer picture of the world below, down to a fish's species and direction. Because more detail means more of this. Only from Humminbird.